Today we're going to talk about smart objects and filters and effects and being able to apply these filters and effects to your layers and to your content without actually destroying the original information on it. And this is called non-destructive editing. So what do you think destructive editing means? Can somebody answer that? No one wants to speak? Okay, well, non-destructive editing, what that is that you're trying to keep as much or all information of the original content of the image as possible, so that you can revert changes, you can keep the image quality and preserve all this original characteristics of the file that you downloaded into the Photoshop space, so that you can make changes and revert these changes. Destructive editing is you are modifying, changing, removing, adding to that original image, and it will be very difficult to revert those changes back if you decide to do so. So for an example, what I have here are two layers of people PNGs. One is rasterized and one is a smart object. And to create a smart object, simply select the layer that you, let me move you guys out of the way. So simply select the layer, right click it, and select convert to smart object. And you'll know it's a smart object because now it has this little thumbnail here indicating that it's a smart object. And okay, I'll show this example of transforming a rasterized image. So I'll make this image really, really tiny, enter to accept the change. And so what Photoshop has done is it's removed quite a few pixels from the original image in order to approximate what these people would look like much smaller than it is when it was brought in. And when I revert that and try to increase the scale, you'll notice that it's extremely blurry. And that's because Photoshop is trying to approximate now what this image will look like at this scale from its previous transformation when it was really, really tiny. So it's lost a lot of information that it had from its original download. What do you guys think will happen if I were to do the same actions to a smart object? Just any guesses? No guesses? Come on, guys, just say anything. Would it be the same or different? So someone says, it will keep the pixels when scaled back, and that's correct. So what a smart object does is it preserves the source image. This is our source image when we converted it to a smart object. So it will remember that all these pixels, and it'll keep that information in its memory, so that when you scale it down, let me select smart object, Control T to transform, and I'll scale it down and enter to accept the transformation. It does the same process. It removes some pixels to appear smaller and give you this representation of the person. But when I scale it back up, we have perfect image quality, the same as when we had it originally before the transformations. And that's because it's remembering all the data that we have when we converted it to a smart object. And so the benefit of smart objects are that if you're thinking that you'll be transforming it often to scale it to different sizes, for example, if you're not sure where you're going to place a person and then change your mind, place it somewhere else and have to transform because it needs to change to the perspective of where it's located, then I would suggest you create smart objects for your layer. A few things that are negative about smart objects are that it's a little bit more memory intensive, so it'll make your file size slightly bigger, and if you have a lot of smart objects, then that will obviously increase the size a lot more. And unlike a rasterized layer where I can apply, say, a paintbrush tool, I can paint onto it because I'm now adding more information that wasn't on the original download of this layer. I could apply that to a rasterized layer, but I can't do that for a smart object because that would be destroying the source information. And there's quite a few commands that aren't applicable to a smart object. And if I were to want to click on it, it'll ask me that I have to rasterize the smart object before I can proceed with that action. And then now it's not a smart object. The icon has disappeared and you can make these destructive changes. Okay, so now in application, this is our scene that we composed from last week. We'll try to do some stylistic edits to it so that it looks more, less of like a collage of items and more of a scene. So a few things I could do is go to the filter tab at the top, filter, and there are quite a few effects that we can choose. Most often I would use blur, so Gaussian blur and motion blur are two effects that I use often. What else are there? There's noise, and mosaic is a nice one. So let's try mosaic on this soccer player, and you'll see it sort of pixelates him, and we could adjust the size of these cells, how large they become, and how much information we sort of distort. And I could click OK to apply, and now our person's quite pixelated. And you could do the same with the rest of the people, and that could be your style for the rendering, pixelated people. I remember a lot when I was in school, somebody used like Barbie dolls and then really saturated them to use it as like a satire on commercialism and consumerism. So yeah, don't make your rendering or there's renderings that you could do that are not photorealistic, and that's fine as well. And what you'll notice when I apply this filter now to this person is that it's now a destructive change. So if I were to edit it, like I'll paint over top and then erase a little bit, these are all destructive changes. So in order to bring it back to the original, I have to undo or go to my panel, my history panel, to revert to a previous change. So I could go back to, this was the destructive change, so I'll go to the one before, and then we'll revert it back. If I were to convert him to a smart object and apply my filter, pixelate mosaic, what's different about this procedure, oh, I have a different person, that's fine. What's different about this procedure, I'll click OK, is that now this effect is not applying directly to the pixels of the image. Because it's a smart object, it's remembering the source content and applying it as sort of a screen or a layer on top that you can adjust and play around. So now what's great about this is I could even toggle it on and off and adjust different transparencies because we have here a layer mask. And if you recall from the previous tutorials, a layer mask allows you to adjust the transparency of an image, or in this case, the filter that is on top of the image, using black and white. So I'll switch to my black color and change to a brush tool. And when I paint over top, I can create more transparency in the filter. And when I change it back to white through this arrow icon or simply pressing X, then I can increase the opacity of this filter and bring back its visibility. And you could adjust the opacities and flow to adjust how much or how little is affected in this layer mask. So you could just adjust a little bit or like that. And if you don't want this filter applied, you could unhide it or simply right click and delete filter mask or delete, smart filter. And then it's gone, but our person's still a smart object. Okay, another way, well, I guess I'll show you just what other filters do. So for blur, it makes items more blurry, and Gaussian blurs the specific blur that most people tend to use. And depending on how big the radius of the pixels are, they'll end up disappearing. So if you want a little blur for your person because they're somewhat in the background and you don't want them to be the main focus of the rendering, then I would suggest using this effect. There's also, I'll select this person. So I have my auto select on, and if I select an item in the workspace, it'll automatically select the layer. So I'll select my person here, go to filter, blur, and now let's try motion blur. And this makes him appear like he's moving really quickly in the scene. So I could adjust how much space there is from the original image. I could adjust the angle that he's moving in. It's sort of flying right now. And accept. And because he's not a smart object, this is a destructive edit. And this is the information that you have to work with now. If you converted him to a smart object, then this would be a filter, and you could adjust the transparencies to see more of the original image or more of this filter. Okay, what else? There's also noise, I said. So this time I'll right click again, convert to smart object, filter, and then there was noise. Okay, can I zoom in? Yeah, zoom in a bit. This is also good if this filter is applied to something in the background or you don't want it to be very noticeable. So it kind of makes it more flatter, I guess. There's these different options you could play around with. I would say the less noise, the better, because this becomes a little bit distracting. So somewhat like this, okay. And as we saw before, it's applied as a filter or a new layer that's attached to this layer that you could toggle on and off and adjust accordingly. So we'll leave that there. Another type of edit that you can make that's non-destructive are effects, and simply double click a layer. So this is my lady carrying the bags. We'll double click it, and there's a few options in this new dialog panel. These are some effects that you could place on top and the according settings that you could adjust and parameters. Some ones that are useful are color overlay. So if you have shadows or you don't want your content to have too much information, just be a flat color, I would choose this. Keep the blend mode at normal, so then the color would just be applied as a flat color. And you could adjust the opacities for this. So this makes it easy if you're not comfortable with like the adjustment layers for brightness levels and curves to darken or lighten an image. Okay, so I'll apply this image or effect by clicking OK. And similarly to the filter effects placed on a smart object, they will have their own attachment and toggles to turn on and off. And it doesn't have to be a smart object, actually. I'll select my lady here with umbrella, and she's not a smart object. She has an adjustment layer, which I will delete for now to show you. So she is a rastered image, and I could double click again to bring up the layer styles and give her a stroke. So this will, is this stroke? No. So here's the stroke, and you can give her an outline now. So I'll zoom in to show you closer. She has a black border around her, and I'll click OK. And this similarly applies as a screen or a filter that could be toggled on and off, and she's not a smart object. So these are also non-destructive edits that you can make to your layers. Okay. Do you guys have any questions so far about smart objects or filters and effects? Again, with these effects, if you don't want it applied, then you could simply right click, disable layer effects, or there should be delete. Clear layer styles, there we go. And we've reverted her back to her original state. What would some other applications of smart objects be? Let's see, what else can you do with a smart object? So I showed you that you could transform it to increase the size or decrease the size and keep the original information. That's a good question, and I don't know at the moment. So maybe I'll discuss it next week, and I'll look around to it. But that's a good question. What are other applications that we could do to smart objects? Or like, other than people, when would you use it? Oh, okay. In terms of like composing a scene, what type of items we could use smart objects for? You could use it for anything, basically. You could use it for your building, because oftentimes I'm not happy with the placement. So I'll select my building here, and I'll notice that maybe I'll come back to it another day and it should be taller than it is when I transformed it. So you could apply a smart object to your building rendering. You could apply it to other ancillary items like this tree here. So anything you think you would often need to modify and change based off how your rendering or your image is progressing, I would say you should apply as a smart filter. And if you're happy with it, then you could rasterize the image so that you could apply other commands and actions such as the brush tool or clone stamp. So if I were to select my background and convert that to a smart object, right click and convert to smart object, then I have the ability to resize it without worrying that the image quality will become poor, because Photoshop is understanding this is the information that I want to keep before I convert it to a smart object, and it will memorize that. But for your background, I would say you wouldn't do that, convert it to a smart object often, because in this case, I had clone stamped it so that the original image had didn't have trees here. It had like these weird bushes that I just clone stamped this part of the image uh, um, to continue this tree line. So in that case, the clone stamp wouldn't apply to it if it were a smart object. And since it's a background, I wouldn't often change its scale. So there you wouldn't need to apply a smart object to it. All right. And lastly, we'll talk about saving our files.
Sorry, Eric. I also have a question about smart objects. It's a very cool feature.
Yeah.
Smart object, can you bring it from another file? So basically, for example, I'm composing my image from different sources, right? And when I'm composing it from different sources, they come in different resolutions, right? So, and it would be cool to bring an image with a resolution different from my current image in my Photoshop file already as a smart object without resampling then it first.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible?
So are you saying, is it possible to bring an image that's already a smart object and not have to
Yes,
convert it?
basically yes.
There are, I think, if you bring a, okay, so I'm not too sure on that, but I know there are specific files you could bring in that they're already smart objects if they're like a vector.
For example, if you open this image, like you have an image which you want to use, if you open it as a new file in Photoshop, if you convert it into a smart object in a new file, will you be able to copy that smart object to your current file?
Okay, let's try that out. Let's try having a new file, whatever this custom workspace is. And so you're asking if I could bring this smart object into the new file.
Yes, basically.
Okay, let's try that out. So I have my smart object person selected. We can hold Control and click this thumbnail, and that will automatically select all the content that's within the layer. Control C and bring this in, and no, they are not a smart object.
And we cannot copy layers, like you cannot copy layers between files.
We'd have to select all the
so
content first.
you're copying content, you're not copying the layer. I see. Oh, it's interesting. Yeah.
Someone has a question regarding brushes. So if we make a stroke or use a brush tool to shade, for example, is there a way to edit the intensity, color, or other factors of that stroke? Yep, definitely. So here I have an example. I'm going to select it, and this is my shadow underneath the building. And I've placed it under its own layer so that it's not affecting any of these other files that I brought in. So I'll try another shadow underneath this lady. So I could select this button next to the trash can, and that'll create a new layer. We can double click it to title it as shadow. And then when I go to my brush command, I'll make my little, or I'll choose black, and I'll make my opacities 0, 100, and that's her drop shadow. Let's pretend. What are a few ways we could adjust the intensity, color, etc.? Well, we have our opacities, so we could change the opacity of this layer so that it's not as intense. And similarly with the fill, we can change this color using, for example, the paint bucket tool. So shortcut is G, and if you don't have the icon here, simply right click and it opens this panel and you could select from that. And we could choose a bunch of different colors from these two boxes, or we can go to our color panel at the top and that adjusts it as well accordingly. So we can make it red and then paint bucket this color. Intensity, color, and other factors of the stroke. And you could apply a blending mode. So this will affect these pixels against this background or whatever it's on top of. So right now it's normal, so it's showing it as a flat color, but I can overlay it on top and you can see that there's a little bit of transparency that affects these pixels on top of the grass. And so if I choose green, that'll make it a lighter color and affect this patch of grass. And similarly, adjust the opacity and these will change its appearance. And again, you could use layer masks. So here, there's no layer mask applied. I can select this rectangle with circle button. Now a layer mask is applied and I could adjust the transparency via using black and whites with my brush stroke. So having black will increase the transparency. I don't want to completely erase it, but I'll lighten it like this using my blacks, and then switching back to white will increase the opacity. Someone's asking, if you copy a smart object that has been scaled down, will the copy be able to scale back to the original size? Let's try that out. Let's try this out. Okay, I have my...
Okay, Eric, I found an answer to my question. It's possible to copy layers between files. When you duplicate a layer, you have a chance to change, to specify another opened Photoshop file as the destination.
Okay.
When you duplicate a layer. So
how do we
this
do this?
way, yeah, this way you can copy layers and you can copy smart object layers.
Okay, perfect. So how do we do that then?
So you duplicate, you select a layer, you click duplicate.
Let's convert this person and duplicate the layer.
Duplicate the layer, and here you should have a destination document drop down.
And then we could see that we have our people 2 and people 1 files open, and we could copy into these and they should be able to apply that smart object layer. Perfect.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's take a look then. Okay. And now our person is in our new file. Excellent.
So when you create a composed image, it's probably useful to bring most of the elements of your composition as smart objects, then you can manipulate them.
Okay. Yeah, so somebody was asking, if you copy a smart object that has been scaled down, will the copy be able to be scaled back to the original resolution? My prediction is that it will, the scale that the transformation was applied, so we'll remember that, but let's take a look. So I have my people 3, which is, let's not use him. Let's use our umbrella lady and convert her to a smart object. Okay. And let's scale her down to something that's incredibly tiny. Duplicate her. Okay. Is this duplicated?
Yes, it's
perfect. And then let's scale them back up.
Yeah, it's still a smart object layer.
And this should be the original one.
Yeah.
So I don't really see a difference, but that's probably because she's so tiny anyways. So let's use her as an example. Convert to smart object, right click and duplicate layer. Yes, that's fine. Oh, no. So we're actually making her smaller first. Oh, wait. Making her smaller. Okay, now we're copying. Duplicate layer. Okay. So we know this one will revert back to the original image quality. Will this one revert to it? Yeah, so if you have converted a smart object and copied it, it will keep that source information from the first conversion. And so it doesn't matter if you've scaled it and transformed it, it will memorize what that information is, which is great. So you don't have to worry too much about um, making sure you start from the beginning. You could always take a smart object, make some transformations, copy it, do whatever, and know that it will always retain that information from the first conversion.
Basically, as I understand it, just another layer. So you created
Yeah.
a complete copy of your smart layer, and this complete copy, just a complete copy. It has the
Mm-hmm.
same raster image as the subject of your manipulation, and the same smart transformation which is applied to your original
Mm-hmm.
layer, right?
Okay. And one more question is, do you have any advice on selecting color palettes? That's a good design question. So if we recall to our art classes in high school, it's always good to remember what types of, um, I guess, color palettes, that's what they're called. So there's a primary, secondary, tertiary. You have your monochromatic, your analogous color schemes. That's what they're called, color schemes. You could go online, honestly, and you could have some like random color scheme generator, random color scheme, color. There we go. And there's so many of these that you could choose from, and then they'll give you a nice selection of palettes that could work, maybe not, and depending on how you like restrict your selections. So view shades. This could work, and then simply save or export that. What else is there? I don't really use these often. I just check one. So these are, yeah. Look. This is a really harmonized color palette. Something I would see in like fall, or not a bright rendering, but a rendering that's kind of fallish, I would say, autumn. So this is a great way to just get an idea of what color schemes appeal to you, and not having to choose randomly colors and then stress over that too much. So I would suggest going online and finding these websites and play around with them, and then copying it, dragging it into Photoshop, and seeing how these work with the elements in your building and your rendering. So good question. That's definitely something we seldom think about too much in terms of with creating a rendering, but it's important because sometimes it leads your eye to specific places. So if you use the right color selection, then that will provide attention to um, certain elements you want to be noticed. Okay. And yeah, so the last thing is saving. Uh, Rule number one, Control S, like all the time, every few minutes, because you'll end up being so involved in the process and working on your um, model and Photoshop images. So anything that you're working on that's a digital software, make sure you save constantly. Um, so when you're working with Photoshop, I suggest that you save two files, one file being your master copy that has all these layers, all this information that you can use to edit and then save and then come back and know that it's all there. And then another file that's sort of your presentation file that is a lighter size and will be something that you place in InDesign or on your poster. So it's not a working file, it's the file that you want to present to your profs or the critics. So let's go to File, Save As, and for this, let's keep it as the native Photoshop PSD file. I'll call it rendering a scene. Yes. Yes. Okay. And if you have a lot of information, this will take a while to save sometimes. Next, let's save as. And we have so many options, like so many. But most of the time, you'll probably use JPEGs, Photoshop PDFs, PNGs, and TIFFs. So all of these have their drawbacks and benefits, and I'm going to create a little bit of a document telling you what you can use them for and why you should use certain file types. But I'll just demonstrate, that when you make your presentation file, you don't need all this information. You don't need layers anymore. You don't need to know what filters are applied. So we'll select one layer at the bottom, scroll to the top, holding Shift, we'll click on this top layer so that everything is selected. And when we right click, there's these three options: merge layers and flatten image. They're basically the same thing, but flatten image removes more information than merge layers. And so now this is not individual information separated into their own layers. They're all one layer that's compiled on top of each other. So should I want to edit it, it's all one image that I'm working with.
Yes.
I will now go to File, Save As, and just to give you an idea of what the difference in file size is, I'll save this as a Photoshop file. I'll say rendering a scene 2. Okay. And they're quite different. This one's 42 megabytes and this one's about a third or a quarter of the size at 12 megabytes. And once you save it as different file types, I would say Photoshop is the most intensive because you're retaining all this information. Once you save it as something like a JPEG, rendering a scene 2, save. And here we can decide how high of a quality we want to create our JPEG. And I find that once you get to this, there isn't so much compression or loss of information when we export it or save it. And it looks pretty much how we see it in our workspace mode in Photoshop. So having 10 is a good quality size. And okay. And when we go back to our folder, we'll have something that's not even a megabyte. So that's the case for having a presentation file, because once you bring it into InDesign and that's compiling a lot of different drawings and diagrams of various file types, you don't want that to be large, because that is what you will be submitting to your prof and submitting online, which having a small file size will just expedite the process and not, you don't have to worry that it will take too long to upload. Okay, and yes, Control S. That's what you should take from this tutorial, if anything, is just to always save. Okay. Just to review, let's say, what did we learn? We learned about non-destructive editing, which is a type of editing where we modify the elements and the content without actually destroying the original information. One way we could do that is by converting the information on layers into smart objects, as we saw with the people example here. Because you can apply transformations such as scaling down and scaling up without it reducing in image quality. And you can also apply filters and effects that are able to be modified separately from the information on the layer. And lastly, saving. Try to save it as 2 files, a master file that retains all this layer information so that you can jump back into it and continue your editing, and then one as a file presentation, final presentation file that you would include into your posters and booklets and etc. All right.